there.
Hi.
We are the
Dyslexia Duo.
Each week, we sit down with amazing people, including top researchers and experts in dyslexia, powerful advocates, affected individuals, and more.
Together, we break down the myths, share real stories, highlight research and strategies to advise our listeners about this prevalent learning disability.
Come join us. Hey, Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So, getting ready to listen to our upcoming podcast that we just did with Dr. Jan Hasbrouck, and I was kind of starstruck by the whole thing.
Oh, me too.
Oh my gosh. She said your name 3 times. I was keeping tally marks. She said, well, Melissa. And I was like, dang, I only have one. I only got one Amy this whole time. But I was just so starstruck. And we had this whole list of questions, and she answered every single one of them. And I learned so much. And she has a new book out, and now I'm going to make it part of my syllabus for training. So what did you think of this episode?
I learned so much as well. And she is incredibly kind and loving. You could tell she has so much passion. I'm excited to read her book, Climbing the Ladder of Reading and Writing.
And she talked about being the awardee for the Samuel Torrey Orton Award from IDA, which is kind of a big deal, which we'll be at as Man on the Street with our podcast. But I'm looking forward to hearing her acceptance speech, because she talked about all the people in her life that she was grateful for that led her on this path as well.
I know, and we get to see her at IDA coming up in October. We are totally going to be fangirls.
Oh, to the hill. We're going to have to make posters and hold them over our head. We have to do it for Dr. Mather, too. She's going to be there, too. So we'll have 2 different sets of posters, and we'll just wave it and go, woo, like we're at a concert.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so let's not delay. Let's go ahead and head into the episode with Dr. Jan Hasbrouck. Hi, this is Amy.
And Melissa.
And we're the
Dyslexia Duo.
So today we're here with Dr. Jan Hasbrouck, and you may recognize her name, and if you don't, you should recognize her name, because to say it like the kids do, kind of a big deal. So I'm going to let her go ahead and introduce herself to our audience.
Well, thank you both, Amy and Melissa. I'm glad to be here. Jan Hasbrouck. I am an educator. That's what I do, and I've been doing this for quite a while. I started off long ago, many decades ago now, as a reading specialist, and it was important trajectory of my career that after about 15 years or so of doing that, my role switched to being a coach, and that led me to all kinds of discoveries. The first discovery being I had no idea how to be a coach. There was no training or anything involved. I didn't even have the title of coach. I was just told, okay, you're not going to work with kids anymore. You're going to go help teachers. And okay, I'll see what that looks like. So that led me to back to the university, actually, to ended up getting a doctoral degree and studying coaching for quite a while. But my interest and love of all things literacy never went away. So although I was pursuing coaching and doing a lot of research in coaching, I continued to do work in literacy. When I was a professor, I worked at University of Oregon first, and then Texas A&M University. And since then, in the 2000s, most of my work has been writing books, working as a consultant with schools and agencies in the United States, but also internationally, which is very exciting. Yeah, so that's the kind of work I do. Most of my work has been focused throughout these years. When I say all things literacy, my focus has actually been rather narrow. My interest from the very beginning were students who struggle with learning to read, including students with dyslexia. So although across the grades I work with that, I'm really particularly interested in the early grades where we help students get launched as readers, intervene as early as possible. I think that the research is very much confirming how important that is. We'll always be ready to provide intervention and remediation as necessary, but the research that keeps coming to say that if we identify these children as early as possible and provide age-appropriate and skill-appropriate interventions, we can prevent all kinds of challenges from happening in reading and writing and spelling. So, yeah, that's kind of what I do.
That's awesome. And I can, we were chatting before we started recording about how things change so much. I've done some form of dyslexia intervention since 92. And I can remember, at least in Texas, and I know Texas is kind of a different state in the way of dyslexia and how we identify and all that. But we weren't identifying kids until third grade. And I remember actually getting a little nervous when a parent of a kindergartner would come up to me and say, hey, we've got a family history of dyslexia, and I'm concerned that my child is dyslexic. And I would get a little sweaty because I wasn't sure what to tell them to do, because I knew my district wouldn't assess that soon. But we know so much more now about how young children learn to read.
That's right. And that we don't worry. I think the research that's compelling to me are those researchers who are saying, let's not get hung up on identifying whether a student has dyslexia or not dyslexia, which is kind of hard to do before third grade. That's one of the reasons we waited, is we felt we had to say, yeah, your struggles are caused by this thing we're going to call dyslexia. I think in the last 10, 15 years, we've really turned the corner on that to say, wait a minute, if we don't worry so much about the causal factors, what we have learned in 50 years or more of research is that the intervention is the same. It's tailored to what are the skills you're struggling with. Some kids may be struggling with reading because of language issues or some aspect of word recognition. And of course, we individualize it that way, not to say all kids are exactly the same, but those cognitive researchers, Stanislaus Dehaene and Mark Seidenberg and so many others, are saying, we've really looked at the brain, and all brains do learn to read the same way. All brains have to be rewired, and components of the brain need to be repurposed for recognizing print and all of those kinds. And the differences are that some brains do that with great ease, some with normal expected ease or challenge, and some, including our children who really do have a language-based disorder that we can call dyslexia, that brain reorganization is super hard for them. But we don't need to wait. We just say, we have better and better tools where we can say with a great deal of confidence who's at risk. And when we think you're at risk at age 5, we do something about it.
It makes all the difference, as you said earlier. I agree. So if you could tell me a little bit about, with all your expertise, how would you define dyslexia?
I just think that the evidence is very clear. And I've heard nobody with any that I would hold up as an expert. Nobody disagrees that some brains are born with some kind of feature that makes learning to read and write and spell extraordinarily difficult. And researchers like the Shawitzes, who have been looking at this for many, many decades, and now the work of Nadine Gabb and so many different people, that there are brain anomalies, neurobiological anomalies that do seem to be genetic. The work of some of the folks working in the genetic aspects of trying to figure out what are the genes, at least to date, are concluding there's not a gene that we're going to be able to identify. There are clusters of genes and different genes, but it is heritable. You do see this brain-based neurobiological disorder passed along in families. So we know that is true for some children. My daughter has dyslexia. There is traceable dyslexia in our family. That aspect is really clear to me. It's a language-based disorder. It has to do with the part of the brain that has primarily, we also know that dyslexia has different dimensions and people manifest with dyslexia differently, but primarily it has to do with the brain's difficulty in recognizing individual phonemes in speech, the work of the Libermans, who first really, I think they were the first people who said, you know what, we need to look at auditory aspects of reading. It's For decades, we focused on the eyes, and there are a lot of theories about the eyes and the eye processing in both hemispheres of the brain and that kind of thing. And the Libermans said, no, we think it's something about how these brains are recognizing and processing sounds in spoken words and then translating that. And that seems to be where a lot of the focus of research has been over the last few years. So that's not the simple, 24-word definition that I can roll off for you, but those are the elements that I think are true. But I also so strongly agree with Jack Fletcher and Nadine Gabb and so many others who are saying, yes, those kids do exist. I know that. I've got one. But we don't need to do all these machinations to find those kids, because at the end of the day, we don't treat them differently. The evidence is that essentially good instruction is good instruction, as long as we differentiate it to make sure we're giving sufficient focus and time on the skill areas that certain students will need.
Yeah, I don't think it's really a 24-word diagnosis either, is it? It's a very difficult, complex disorder that kids have. And I agree with you wholeheartedly about the instruction and how it needs to be quality instruction as well. And the school districts really are doing, I think, making improvements in getting those kids identified a little bit earlier. And this is so instrumental, having things like this available to people to listen to and advocate. Hopefully parents will be better advocates for their children to get the different instruction that they need for their child.
Right.
How, in your opinion, or in your studies, not necessarily your opinion, but in what you've researched, how does multisensory instruction or structured literacy support those with dyslexia or students who are struggling to read? In my career, even though I work from a curriculum, I know I'm going to differentiate. I know I'm going to be prescriptive. And I know that even though I might have two groups starting in the same place, I'm going to treat how I work with those groups differently just because of who the children are. And they're going to have different needs because dyslexia exists on a continuum. So how does multisensory instruction or structured literacy, how does it help our students?
Let's just start with structured literacy as a relatively new term. I am very grateful for the work that IDA has done in helping create that terminology, compiling together in this one term the multifaceted dimensions that decades now of research has said is important. We should always be talking about and focusing on comprehensive instruction that covers all of the areas. We can think just simply about Scarborough's rope. Comprehensive instruction needs to deal with all of that. It is not about phonics. It's not just about phoneme awareness. It has to be comprehensive. We know it also has to be systematically designed. That's decades of research say when we're more carefully design instruction, we choose a good scope and sequence. We also know researchers have given up trying to find the scope and sequence. There's not one, but there are ones that are much, much better than others. And we have to use that design and how many examples do we give? What is the scope? What's the sequence of things? We also know that explicitly delivered instruction, when students are acquiring a new skill, especially one as complex as learning to read, if we are rarely very explicit, showing the students what we want them to do, providing mountains of guided practice and assisted supportive practice. We know that works. We know that when this is all supported by good data, students do better. So instead of just talking about, using every time, be sure we're doing comprehensive, systematic, explicit, intensive, data-informed instruction that has a multisensory aspect about it. We can just say, let's do structured literacy. But we have to be sure that we're using that term in a similar way. Like anytime in education, seems we come up with a new term, people start being creative with it, using it different ways. But I'm really comfortable with it and I like it. And I think it's a nice streamlined way of talking about this very multifaceted aspect of both what we're teaching, the comprehensive aspect about it, and how we're teaching it. That what and how together also is part of structured literacy. And within that, there are some aspects of what we're now calling structured literacy that there is just tremendous research support for. Things like explicit instruction. I did my original undergrad work in my master's program, the start of my doctoral program at the University of Oregon, which is really the foundation. Those were the people I got to work with when I first started learning to teach, who came up with this notion of explicit direct instruction. They kind of invented it and they studied it. And that was 50 years ago, and found that it worked. And it has 50 years of evidence to show that when we show students, provide guided practice and independent practice at the dosage and level that is necessary, kids are going to learn. Even kids with severe learning challenges will learn. So that one aspect, the systematic design, the comprehensive. One aspect, though, of structured literacy, that multisensory, is getting some new attention. And some of the research that's coming out is making some of us rethink how we've been using that term. Much of what we've been doing around multisensory instruction was based not on research, but on theory. Theories that if kids have dyslexia, that reinforcing their instruction by using tactile simulations and those kinds of things, that's all going to make their learning better. And then people have been studying it. And just recently, there was a meta-analysis done by Liz Stevens and others who looked at all the studies available on multisensory and found that actually, much of what we're calling multisensory instruction really does work, but it works because it's systematically designed and explicit instruction. It's not the sandpaper letters, the shaving cream, the rice trays, those kinds of things. There has been a belief in the field of dyslexia that it is those tactile supports that are necessary. And let's just acknowledge, we've already said, these kids are different. They're all different. And there may be a child for whom, and especially if they have serious attentional challenges, doing things like tracing sandpaper letters or something may be helpful for an individual child. But to the belief that was prevalent for a long time, that if you have dyslexia, you need these kind of tactile supports, has really been disproven. But what I really appreciate is people pointing out that good instruction, although it may not be multi-sensory in a tactile way, it should be multimodality. Yep. We've known that if we present information to children or any learner, but especially children, that is auditory, visual, they hear it, they see it, they say it, And the tactile kinesthetic part is writing it. When we do that, when we incorporate all the modalities of learning into each lesson, our students do better. So if we do just a little tweak on this notion that we're not going to say, oh, multisensory, but rather than that term, which has gotten to be associated with tactile supports, kinesthetic supports, I really appreciate this sort of the shift in the term. Let's use the term multimodality, and we can all agree because of evidence. Like you say, we don't have to talk about beliefs. We have evidence for this, that supports learning.
That's awesome. Thank you. So I love that because I'm sitting here thinking, I'm taking all this in and I'm writing it down. And like, I have teachers I'm training in a couple of weeks. I'm going to bring some of this up with them. So I really appreciate all of that.
I kind of wanted to piggyback on what you were talking about with structured literacy. Does structured literacy include Orton Gillingham? Or are you saying that Orton Gillingham is still kind of separate from structured literacy?
Well, different people are going to think of it in different ways. I'm looking at the work that Barbara Wilson and so many people have been doing within IDA to really do a very careful, thoughtful look at the newest research, the highest quality research, and trying to tease out the truths, if you will, of that, and then presenting it back to practitioners in a way that is accurate and intelligible and useful. And so I think that I would have to ask Barbara and others who are involved in that definitional work what their thinking was on incorporating or not incorporating Orton Gillingham. My sense of when I talked to Barbara and the others, I mean, it wasn't Barbara alone, but she took a great leadership in that, the work of Margie Gillis and so many others. I think the shift is let's be brave and be willing to let go of things we've believed and look at the best evidence that we have from science, whether it aligned with our former beliefs or not. Let's wipe the slate clean and just look at what has the strongest evidence. And what has the strongest evidence gives us guidance for what should we be teaching and how we should be teaching it. And that incorporating all of that in this relatively new label of structured literacy, to me, it's kind of a fresh start. There will be people who feel like it hasn't accommodated the way they used to do things that has worked for them. And whatever, you can call it Orton Gillingham, you can call it different things. One of the strengths, I think, one of the benefits of structured literacy is its newness. And if we're diligent about trying to keep to a shared definition, it avoids the things like what has happened, in my opinion, and I'm certainly not, this is not particularly my field, I haven't really studied it, but it seems to me what's happened to the term Orton Gillingham is that that's one of those terms or labels that lots of people have said, we're Orton Gillingham. Oh, we're Orton Gillingham. Oh, our organization is Orton Gillingham. There's not a central group that says, oh, yeah, no, you're not actually true to the principles of Orton Gillingham. I think moving away from Orton Gillingham because it has gotten less clear about what it really is.
Right.
So, yes, we can be very thankful and grateful for the original work of Sam Orton and Gillingham and the incredible pioneering work they did that has set us on this path today. It got conflated. It got
confusing a little bit.
But yeah, so, recognize that's the history. That's our history. But where we are today is structured literacy, the agreement around strong evidence-based of those components within structured literacy.
I appreciate that clarification because I feel like it's a little confusing being in this field for so many years. And now I'm seeing all these terms thrown around and I just feel a little bit confused. And I'm thinking all of us want to be doing the right thing for kids. If we're in this field and we're providing services to children, we all want to be doing what's best for kids.
Absolutely.
So if you're hearing Orton Gillingham, then you hear structured literacy and which one is the right one? Which one's the best one? That's where I feel like I'm like, okay, I need to know the answer from the real experts about this. So I appreciate that.
What would, in your opinion, in your thoughts, in our years as educators, we've had to talk about dyslexia to various groups. So, sometimes you have to explain what it is to the classroom teacher that I don't want to say they don't really believe in it. I mean, it's not a thing to believe or not believe, but how would you explain dyslexia to a classroom teacher? This is her first time. I can remember doing trainings for campuses, and I'd say, okay, everybody needs to come and do this dyslexia awareness for the campus. And I'd have a teacher say, well, I don't have any dyslexic students. I'm like, well, you do. You just don't know who they are yet. So how would you explain dyslexia to a teacher?
Well, in my book that I wrote about dyslexia, I did use the most current definition from IDA that every few years gets re-examined and hopefully incorporates our evolving and best information about what dyslexia is. So I think, and it's complex definition, a couple of sentences long, but I think sharing that and then going through it word by word. So it does talk about a neurobiological condition. I don't know if in the definition it talks about it being on a continuum or a spectrum. So we have to definitely mention that to teachers too, that there's severe dyslexia, and then there's very mild dyslexia that may only manifest in some spelling problems, but the children become actually pretty good readers. And talking about for most children with dyslexia, it has a phonological component. It's that aspect of their brain that it has nothing to do with intelligence. It has nothing to do with gender. We used to believe some things about that, but we now know that no matter what your intellect, you can have dyslexia. You can be a boy or a girl and have dyslexia, that you're born with this condition, but that instruction is the intervention. The other mythology I also want to always talk to teachers and parents about is the eye issue. It's not a visual issue. Children who are blind can have dyslexia. It's not a visual issue at all. We thought for decades and decades that it was. So there are leftover beliefs about that. And there are some people, professionals, they may be a little bit nefarious, but they will sell eye treatments, eye exercises, certain colored lenses for glasses or those kind of things to parents and say, this is the answer. And we have to advise and support our teachers that that's not. Although there are children with dyslexia who may have visual issues, they may have visual coordination issues, they may have issues with their eyesight. So we have to take those into consideration, but that's not what we call dyslexia. And we as instructors don't focus on the eyes when we're doing the instruction. What we focus on is helping those brains connect the auditory sounds in words to print. That aspect that we all have to learn that connection in order to learn to read and write. Children with dyslexia can learn that. It's just for them, it's going to be more challenging. It's going to take longer, but we can do it.
Yes, absolutely. And so interestingly enough, on my way up to my office for the recording, I was talking to a parent on the phone that I'm working with. and she's a parent educator. So, but she was talking a little bit about dyslexia. And she goes, even as an educator, I don't know all the things I should know. And I'm like, sister, I'm right there with you. I don't know all the things I should know, honestly. But what about that parent who isn't the teacher, who isn't in the educational system? How could we explain that to a parent? And I'm not saying, bring it down, but in a way that they could understand, not being in the educational world.
Talking to them about the fact that learning to read and write and spell is a big ask for every brain. Nobody is born with the ability to do that, although some children acquire that, very small number of children, but there are some children who essentially teach themselves to read. But the most of the rest of us, our brains need to be taught. And what reading is, at its very basic, is helping recognize that this verbal spoken language that we have learned naturally without instruction, that we've learned a way to represent that in print. In our language, we use an alphabetic code. And learning to read and write involves learning the connection between the speech and the printed code. Children with dyslexia have a more difficulty doing that, not because they're not trying hard enough, not because they're not smart. And some of our children with dyslexia are super smart. It's that their brains don't as easily make that connection between the spoken language and the print. But the good news is we know how to teach that. We teach that. That is what teachers are teaching in every kindergarten, in every first grade classroom, in every second grade classroom. But when our children, if I'm talking to a parent, your child is getting that same instruction, but the amount of instruction, the level of instruction that's going to help their classmates become readers fairly quickly, your child is going to get there. But that instruction, we need a whole lot more of it. It needs to be more intensive. I would certainly want the message to be powerful, to be positive. And then any questions that they might have about the why, we're still trying to figure that out, why your child's brain is working that way. There's a lot of theories and they're quite complex. But again, the good news is the answer is instruction. Yes. Showing your child lots and lots and lots of practice, keeping them encouraged and continuing to build their language, because their ability to read and write and spell is going to be based on their vocabulary, their background knowledge and experiences. So I would also want to talk to the parent. If I knew their child's language background, I would want them to talk about that, because that's one way also that parents can continue to support their children at home, is that reading to the children, making sure they have, the experiences with language and speech and just experiences with life to build that background knowledge. All of that can make once they do break the code, and they will, we're going to get there, all that language is what we tap into. So that's a part that parents can play really easily. Just keep reading to your children, keep talking to your child, keep giving them wonderful experiences out in the world.
That's perfect. And when I would be in ARDS or 504s in my past, I would tell parents, read with your children, you take a page, they take a page, listen to audiobooks, and they're like, isn't there more I can do? I'm like, well, yeah. I always said that if I could take my students on field trips, once a month, I'd do it, but can't do that. But so how would you tell either a teacher or a parent how to explain dyslexia to a child? And it could be a child in elementary or maybe even in secondary. So let's just split the difference and say fifth grade. Well,
we do have to say that to a child that all brains are different, and all brains, some things that they're particularly good at and some things that they are find a little bit harder. Some people are just artists and art, and to be able to draw or sing or play music. Their brain just does that so easily, those lucky people. Some brains are just really, really good at spatial relationships. They, once they start learning things like geometry or even crafting things, they're just really good at that. Some brains are really, really good at reading, and some brains aren't. So your brain, if I'm talking to a child who has struggles with dyslexia, and I would often, and what I try to do with children is before we talk about their dyslexia, what is your brain really good at? And kids they all know what they're good at. I met with a little girl this summer, and she said her superpower was her social skills. She just said, I'm really good. And she knows what she's talking about. She's just gregarious and fun and social and extroverted. And she was saying the reason I was working with her is her parents suspected, she was a fourth grader going into fourth grade, suspected she had dyslexia. And the whole family was really focused on this, including her, because her sister was one of those gifted readers, 2 years older, had learned to read before kindergarten, just so we could compare her to her sister. She said, my sister is so good at reading, but she's just no good with people at all. She just She said, if the mailman comes to the front door, she runs. And so we were able to talk about strengths and varying difficulties, and the acknowledgement that your brain, for some reason, has to work harder. It's not impossible, but it's harder to make those connections, which makes reading words harder. It makes spelling words harder. It makes reading text harder to read fluently, which then makes understanding or comprehension a little bit more difficult. But all those things can get better with practice. Even if you're not good at math, you can get good at math with practice. If reading is hard, you can help your brain, but you have to exercise it. You have to work it. So those are the kind of conversations I would have, not getting much more technical than that, unless the child wanted it. If they are asking for the layers of why is that happening? And we can give answers about those things. But I find visuals too, like Scarborough's rope and Nancy Young's ladder of reading and writing, to show that different kids, just their brains, and that infographic is really all about the ease of learning to read and write. And we can and I did that with that little girl. I said, your sister's up here in the green. She's one of those kids. Her brain works really well at reading. This is only about reading. You're down here. And we looked at that. She said, I think I'm in the red. And I had assessed her by that point. And I said, I don't think you're in the red. I think you're maybe in the orange. So that reading is kind of difficult, more difficult than all these other kids, but I don't think your brain has to work as hard as the kids in the red. So those are the kinds of things. I do think the visuals help, and the talking about the strengths and the differences in brains. But once again, Amy, always coming back to the positive, that instruction, learning, practice, you can get there. And that's what we're all here to help you do that.
And I think it's so important when you're in it, when you're dyslexic and you just don't feel like you're having a lot of success with the school. I think we need to remind our students, our own children, what they're good at, because you get stuck in your own head so often.
Yeah. Oh, you do. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt. It's awful. I mean, I always have that conversation with these kids too. This sucks.
Yeah.
It's much easier. I'm not particularly good at math. And the fact that I'm not particularly good at math just wasn't that big a deal. When you're not good at reading, writing, and spelling, it's the worst.
Yes,
it's like, let's just cry. Let's hug it out. This is, it's just a darn yucky thing.
Because you have to read to do anything.
Now let's talk about the positives. This is what to be in reading, and here's where you are in reading, and I know you want to be here, and we're going to work to get you there. But yeah, acknowledging that it sucks. It's awful.
Thank you for that.
So as far as the language therapy is concerned, once we do a lot of the interventions with the kids, we teach them how to decode words, and they start getting their automaticity with reading words, at least the decoding part. Where I struggle, this is always where I feel like it comes in the last, is the fluency. That fluency piece is one of the hardest things for me in my therapy practice to remediate. So I wondered if you could explain a little bit, what is fluency and how can we help?
I'm happy to do that. Fluency has been a real focus of my research work, and that came out of, as all my work has done, out of my practical, my work with actual children, because like you, Melissa, I found that I had a good toolkit and the skills and knowledge to teach pretty much all my children, all my students, to learn how to decode and understand sentences. And I could get them up to a certain level, but then they sort of hit a wall. Mm-hmm. And for many of our students with dyslexia, fluency is the wall that they hit. And what we now understand fluency, or I prefer to call it passage reading fluency, because that term fluency, we use it with talking about our fluidity or fluency with language. We talk about fluency with math facts. Fluency can mean different things. So being really specific about what we're talking about here is passage reading fluency. Some researchers call it text reading fluency. It's the same thing. Well, so what it is, the ability to read a passage fluently requires three basic components. And the first that we always need to talk about first, I always use the term first, foremost, and forever. It's accuracy that we need to be talking about. Accuracy often is treated as the sort of secondary component of fluency, and it is absolutely not. It is the foundation of fluency. So we have to, if you're a fluent reader, you can read with reasonable accuracy. And we know what that is. Researchers who have narrowly targeted and zoomed in on accuracy have come up with the number. It's always a range, because we're talking about human beings reading all different kinds of text. But in general, we have to be about 98% accurate in our reading. We have to know about, and sometimes the range goes as low as 95%, but that's as low as it is. If you're reading text and you are not able to recognize and know the meaning of, understand 5% of your text, you will not understand what you've read. Really have to be minimum 95, more solidly fluent. We would have an accuracy level of about somewhere around 98%. So accuracy is the component. You can read and understand the words, that the individual words that the text is comprised of. The second component, and it's right there after accuracy, it is a major part of fluency, but that is rate. Speed sometimes, how quickly you read, but rate is a more technical term, because we don't want to talk about reading speed. It's not about how fast you read. It's an appropriate rate. So it's reasonable accuracy at an appropriate rate. And the appropriate rate that we hope our students get to is closer and closer and closer to the rate of spoken language. Because the whole reason we care about fluency, the reason fluency is essential and important, is because of comprehension. We want our students to be fluent, because when you're fluent, you have a far greater possibility of understanding what you're reading. So we build on that accuracy. We incorporate rate, but not as fast as possible, only move it toward sounding like speech. And the third component of passage reading fluency is expression, or prosody, which, like accuracy, is all about helping us read in a way that reflects spoken language, so that our brain recognizes what the print means. We would all do a much better job if we never disconnected any conversations about fluency, if we keep those conversations connected to comprehension. It's all about comprehension. Fluency is all about comprehension. And too often we treat it as this separate thing. Let's just get kids reading. Like, no, we get them reading always for comprehension at the word level. As soon as we're reading words, we need to teach our students that these words carry meaning and phrases carry meaning and text carries meaning. And then our job on top of that is to make sure that we're doing the instruction to lay that foundation of accuracy, helping our students reach that level of automaticity. That term automaticity is really the marriage of accuracy and rate. That's what automaticity is. And then prosody or expression is kind of the icing on the cake, the layer on top of it. You take accurately read text at an appropriate rate and then make it prosodic, make it mirror spoken language. That's beautiful. But the work, especially with our children with dyslexia, it's not prosody that we worry about. It's the accuracy and the rate. And the reason that will always, always be a factor in dyslexia is because another aspect of dyslexic brains is they don't process as quickly, smoothly, effortlessly, accurately as non-dyslexic brains. In fact, I remember finding it really fascinating to understand that in other languages, especially languages that are far more transparent or regular than English, which is almost all languages, but there are languages in the world that are highly transparent, super regular. And there's dyslexia in those languages. There's dyslexia everywhere in the world. But children with dyslexia learning to read in a highly transparent language often have no problems up until about third grade. They learn to decode quite readily. Decoding is just not so challenging when you've got a highly regular or highly transparent language, such as Spanish, Finnish, Korean. There are many. But once they start reading text, they often are not able, without a great deal of effort, to maintain the fluency levels of their non-dyslexic neurotypical peers. It manifests as a fluency problem only or primarily. So the fact that our kids struggle with the decoding part, learning to read, and then fluency is not a surprise. Although in English, we focused so much on dyslexia being a problem with decoding, it is also a problem or a challenge with fluency. And the spectrum aspect of dyslexia plays a role in here too, because we can help quite a few of our students with dyslexia become pretty fluent, but there are some who are never going to be able to read at the level of speech. They're just not, despite our best efforts. That's going to be the limit. But we keep working on it. We keep working on those components, not just reading faster, but the accuracy, rate, and expression in the service of comprehension. We can help most students get fairly fluent, and some reach typical or normal or expected levels of fluency, but some may never get there because of their dyslexia.
Interesting.
Thank you for that.
Couple of things. I was taking notes crazily while you were discussing this, and you were talking about rate. And we do fluency practice in dyslexia therapy settings. Some of my kids use it, whatever is included in the curricula. Sometimes I do the read naturally with my students, which does have the questions after it, which makes sense now that you say it. Now I understand. But I have one little boy that I work with who, and I know he's not supposed to trade rate for accuracy, but I cannot get him to slow down. And I joke around. I'm like, dude, you're going to pass out. You need to take a breath while you're reading. And he does. He sounds like a cattle auctioneer. And I had put that in my notes because I'm like, okay, hold on. We're not in Fort Worth Rodeo. You're not auctioning off a cow or anything like that. Slow down. So how could I try to model for him? I said, it should sound like your speech. It shouldn't be, because you don't talk like that. What else could I do to help ease him along with that? Maybe, I don't know, other than repetitions.
I would give him harder text.
Okay.
He's got the speed down.
Yeah.
Check speed. So what are the aspects of fluency? It's accuracy, rate, and expression. Fluency practice or instruction is like going to the gym. There's a certain amount of practice that needs to be done, and it needs to be done at an appropriate level. But if you're going to build your fluency muscle, just like going to the gym, you got to work on stuff that's just a little harder than you can already do. We used to believe, and I know I was taught this, we should do fluency practice on independent level text. When you're off by yourself, totally by yourself, independent text makes a whole lot of sense. But when you're in an instructional situation, instruction means you're learning something. So what does that student not do? He's reading words too easily.
Yeah.
Let's make it harder for him. And Tim Shanahan has written quite a bit about that, cites studies where students make significant gains when they are receiving instruction in really challenging text. But we're not just, practice this hard text over and over until you lay the foundation of accuracy. So give him something that he can't read. Help him slowly as necessary, learn what the words are sentence by sentence. Good. Now you know those words. Now read that sentence fluently. Good. Now let's go on to the next sentence and make sure you know all those words. Now read that sentence fluently. Now read the two sentences fluently. He's working his accuracy muscle. He's learning new words. He's learning to read more complex sentences. That's what needs to happen for that student. Just if in telling him he can read fast and he wants to read fast, so it's too easy.
Okay, that helps me a lot, honestly. And then another thing, while you were talking, I think about going to IEP meetings or ARD meetings, and they say the student will read the given text with 80 to 85% accuracy. And if our accuracy should be 95 to 98%, they're missing a lot of meaning within that given text.
Oh my gosh. Yes, you could do this at an ARD meeting if you needed to convince somebody. Take a passage of, not super hard, but text that we should all be able to read, and block out 15% of the text and ask somebody what that text means. You don't know, right? Unless you're just taking out the little tiny words, but you block out meaning words. And you block out 5% of the meaning-based vocabulary words you cannot understand it. I do that in my workshops. I have passages that I don't block out the words, but the words are unfamiliar. I have a medical text, and most of us can decode the word, but that's only half the battle. You need to know what the word means, and it's a small little. It's like 30 words. And there's about 5 of them that none of us know. No. You just read, 90-some% of that text, and you can't tell me what it means.
Right. Yeah. Right.
It's not 80. I don't know where 80 and 85 came from.
I don't know. I think people think, that sounds like an attainable goal. Yeah. It's up there, but not. Yeah.
We've just used it for so long, but we have evidence. We have research evidence that says it's 95 is the minimum for comprehension.
I think we need to play this clip before anybody walks into an ARD now. Everybody understands that.
And now a word from our sponsor.
Hi, This is Amy Rodenroth, and as part of the Dyslexia Duo podcast team and owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services, I want to talk to you about my business. Our COUT-trained team offers expert virtual or in-person therapy located in Prosper, Texas, using proven dyslexia curricula like Take Flight, Build, MTA, Alphabetic Phonics, and Reading by Design. We also provide crucial independent evaluations and advocacy services. Don't wait. Empower your child today. Visit www.discovereed.com to learn more. That again is www.discoveread.com. Discovereed, covering all your dyslexia needs.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents, because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Let's return to the show. How can reading fluency be developed? Maybe, we have things within our curricula, but what else can we do to help develop reading fluency?
Well, just what you said is perfectly fine. And that's what I would do most of the time. I would take the kids' text that they're reading. I'm a huge fan of Read Naturally, Read Live now that they call it, especially when, I've used it extensively. I've done research with using it to remediate fluency issues. But when you're using Read Naturally or Read Live exactly as they prescribe, you are placing kids in highly challenging text. I think I watch teachers use it in an intuitive way, and they often place students in text that is much too easy for them to make progress. They're going to only make progress if you take them to the gym and they lift weights. Not too heavy, because then you can injure yourself or get discouraged. But if you're just lifting the weights that you can already easily lift, you're not building muscle. And if the kids are behind, we need to build their fluency muscle, which means they need to become automatic. They need to achieve automaticity in text they can't already read. So we give them hard text. All of the first steps in Read Naturally or Read Live is to learn the words, read along with the narrator. And if they already know the words, they're wasting their time. They need to do that 3 times. The default is 3 times, because they're not supposed to know the words until they've read it 3 times. And if they do already know the words, move them to a higher level.
Right.
So they have to learn the words. They have to work at that accuracy piece. Building accuracy builds fluency. It's the foundation. Build that accuracy, then do the work, multiple practices to build the automaticity and the prosody, and the whole time be responsible for paying attention to what the text means, which Read Live does that too. You can't go on till you can answer these questions. It's a brilliantly designed intervention, and it works really well when we use it as it was designed. And it was designed to put kids in the fluency gym.
It definitely does. I love it. I have it. I pay out of pocket for my kids to be using it, but I love it.
I do too. I do have a question regarding that, though. When they do get to those words that are exercising them, and the frustration starts to kick in, because it does when these dyslexic kids get to these harder words. Yeah. What do you recommend for us? Like, do we tell them the word right away and let them go on, or do we have them try to sound out a word that they really don't have the skills to sound out yet?
Boy, that I wish I had a real quick answer for you, but I know when I'm working with students that I, on the spot, make those decisions.
Okay.
It's a word I'm just going to tell them. It's highly irregular. It's not a word they're going to see very often. Just tell them the darn word.
Okay.
If it's a word that has prefixes and suffixes and aspects of morphology or other things that we're working on, there's a place to apply skills. But if the word is just like really challenging to decode or not decodable because it's irregular, or it's just a word they're not going to see very much, it's not a high utility word, just tell them. But I would also almost always, I hardly do anything always, but almost always where we've spent some time, they've come up with a hard word, I've encouraged them to figure it out, or I've told them the word. They go back to the beginning of the sentence and read the whole sentence again.
Yes.
This is, I want to avoid at all costs word by word reading. Got that right? Go on. You got it wrong? Go on. It's all reading is for comprehension. So what good comprehenders do if they struggle on a word, they back up a little bit. So because good readers are reading for meaning. Sure. Struggling readers are reading word by word, and we cannot encourage that or let them. But we don't, Melissa, you're so right. We don't want these kids to go, I hate this. This is too hard. Right. And when we see that, let's do some, and little brain breaks. Mm-hmm. Close the book. If you're working one-on-one with a student, we can do all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Yep. We've hit the wall. Let's take a break, close this book, do something else. Let's write something or talk about something, and then we'll go back, and then we will go back to it. But be prepared for all of those things.
Okay. Mm-hmm. That's very comforting. Thank you. You're right. It's that last thing that develops. And I've had a lot of students never get their prosody before they're moving on to the next school when I've been in school districts before.
Yeah. Right.
So how does expression or prosody play a part in the reading fluency?
Overall, it plays a relatively minor role. The part that's not minor are those, the diacritical marks that we teach our students. Hopefully they learn about periods and question marks and those kind of things. In kindergarten and first grade, they learn the purpose of them. It's to help the author, the person that wrote this, put those in there so that you know when to stop. And you know when to pause your voice, and you know when to sound excited, and you know when to question. And students need to pay attention to those students that run over periods like, no, you didn't stop at the stop sign, go back. And sometimes the remediation is to really slow down and go back, just like no sixth grader. You have spent a lot of years reading text incorrectly. We're going to go back now. You're going to stop at the period. And I want to hear you stop. And I want to hear like an exaggerated pause at commas until I see that you're really paying attention to that. So that's really foundational there. But the other parts we've learned, and this is what the research, those researchers who study prosody have said, if we think about the three components of fluency, accuracy, rate, and expression, accuracy and rate very, very clearly contribute to comprehension. You're not going to comprehend if your accuracy is not reasonable. You're not going to comprehend if you read either too quickly or too slowly. So accuracy and rate, automaticity are hugely contribute to comprehension. Researchers say that most of the aspects, aside from the diacritical marks, those aspects of lilting your voice and volume and fluidity and those kinds of things, those are outcomes of comprehension. You don't know, a reader doesn't know whether to sound excited or sound terrified or sound silly if they don't know what the text means. You use expression to communicate what the words mean. You don't know how to do that. You don't know what expression to use if you don't understand the words. So if a student is not reading with expression, it's quite likely, unless they have a language disorder, which, some of our students do. But if they're not reading with expression, they don't understand what they're reading. And then that kicks in a whole, we don't just remediate the expression, we remediate why are you not able to use the appropriate expression. You don't understand the words. It's a comprehension issue. Or in some cases, you've got a language processing disorder where you're just not processing spoken language even. And that's a whole other thing.
That's amazing. I can think of so many kids that I work with when we work on paying attention to punctuation, and they have a flat effect when they read, right? And I'll model it for them, and I'll show the expression, and I'll use the same sentence, and I'll say, now you do it. And it's exactly the same, what they say back to me. And I'm like, and paying attention to that text and even the punctuation is huge. It's an ongoing battle. But as our kids go further into remediation, the low-hanging fruit is decoding. I really feel like higher up there is that fluency and prosody piece and paying attention to the punctuation. Going along with that, we hear a lot about sight words in our world, okay? So what is a sight word? And just define for our audience, what is a sight word? And what is an irregular word? And are they really interchangeable or what is it?
Okay. Yeah, let's have that conversation. Sight words are exactly, way back when we started, we talked about how we in education will take a term and use it creatively sometimes. And that's what's happened to the term sight word. Practitioners use that term differently than researchers do. So practitioners have come to incorrectly use the term sight word to mean words that are irregular. And the reason that's incorrect and problematic is because that kind of implies that these irregular words have to be learned by sight. And that is an old belief. We really used to think that in the 1940s and before that in the 50s and even further on. The belief was some of these words are just so weird in our language that your brain has to, the way we good readers read words like the number one or most of the number words, or many of the number words, most of the color words, but the number one word, the word one, O-N-E, the word I, E-Y-E. I mean, these are, have with this E on the end of it. The theories about that, when we really didn't know what was going on in the brain, the theories were we good readers have memorized those words, and our brain has taken pictures of those words. We have an image of that word that we instantaneously recognize by sight, just like an image or a photograph. So those are sight words, and we teach them by sight. We just hold up the flashcard, this word is one, and you just keep at it until your brain has taken a picture of it. That's what we used to believe. That's not true. And researchers use the term sight word for any word that our brains have, any word our brains do instantaneously, precognitively recognize. So the overlap in those two ideas is, yes, all good readers have within their brain a lexicon. For a lot of good readers, it's huge. This library or lexicon of words that our brains have essentially memorized. But what the researchers know, because of the amazing research of Linnea Airy and others is that Linnea gave us the original theory about this, and now it has been proven to be true, is that, yes, good readers have memorized words. We instantaneously, precognitively, that's important part, because we don't have to think about it. In fact, we can't think as fast as our brain recognizes words, which is why good readers are so fluent, is because their brain recognizes those words, and we can say them, we can recognize them as fast as, or even faster than we can say them. But the way words become sight words is by multiple practices with looking at the sequence of letters in words. And the term that Linnea created was orthographically map our brains. And that's really important to think about. It's not the mapping, it's the orthographic mapping. It's not an image, it's the orthography that's being mapped. It's the order of the letters. And when a neurotypical brain that has has learned the foundational components of the alphabetic principle, they understand that those letters, those visual representations, the orthography is connected to phonology. So they see the letter, they connect it to the sound, and in a regular word, not an irregular, but a regular word, we look at that letter sequence, the sound sequence, we instantaneously recognize it. And when we've done that for a neurotypical brain, 3 to 4 encounters with that word, or possibly a bit more, that becomes orthographically mapped as a sight word within our brain. And that orthographic mapping process is also enhanced by knowing what the meaning of the word is. We orthographically map a word earlier if it's regular in its phonological orthographic representation, and it's presented to us with meaning. Then our brains more readily recognize that word and map it. And we want as many words as possible to become sight words. I think Jan Wasowitz, there are others who have said this, all words want to grow up to be sight words. And it's just a process. And the more our brains get used to orthographically mapping, then they orthographically map newer words faster. Irregular words are harder to decode, therefore they're harder to orthographically map. But the newer methodologies, teaching processes that we're using in kindergarten and first grade and second grade and on up, is to point out to students not to have to memorize visually the word as an image, because that's not how our brains work. It's not that it can't be done that way. I didn't learn phonics when I was taught to read. That came much, much later. And they held up flashcards and I learned them. But what my brain was doing was translating that into a spoken word, and then my brain somehow memorized that. So we want to, when we are teaching a word like one, introducing that to children, what we're going to do is let them know somehow that this is an irregular word. It's not going to sound out the same way, but there's almost always some parts of the word that are orthographically regular. So in the word one, there is that sound, and we can recognize that. We don't want students to abandon we don't want them to abandon the alphabetic principle. We don't want them to abandon their decoding strategy. But some words it's going to work perfectly. In other words, there's going to be some parts that are irregular, or a little bit, people are using the heart word technique, where we put little hearts or some markers under just to read as a mnemonic for kids. Those are the parts that you have to just remember. But even those words, those highly irregular words or slightly irregular words, are going to be orthographically mapped at some point with exposure to the letter order and the meaning of the word, If they're highly irregular, it's probably going to take more exposures before they're orthographically mapped. And then we have to, have students retrieve those words, practice those words. It's just like it's in your brain now, you never need to worry about it again. Although David Kilpatrick and others remind us that once a word is orthographically mapped, we don't lose it. Unless you have a traumatic brain injury or a stroke, even if you haven't seen a word, you might not instantaneously retrieve it. That's why for high frequency, high utility words, we want to expose kids to lots and lots of reading so they see these words a lot and they keep that up there. But we don't lose words unless we have some kind of brain injury. That storage is pretty robust in our brains.
That's a lot more than I thought. Because I have a little boy who, a student of mine. We go through the Fry list. And God bless him. I tell him, he goes, "Is that decodable?" And I'm like, "These are sight words." These are sight words. And he's trying to decode the words that aren't decodable. And I like that he's trying to decode it, but he's having a hard time. He's got that crutch now, and he's trying to decode everything. So I've taken to circling the part of the word that's irregular so that he knows, there's nothing about that word that's regular, so the whole word is being circled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the one you just have to learn by heart. That's where that term
and there's no meaning, there's no concrete meaning that can be attached to that.
That's right. Those are the words that are harder. Because when you have all those things in place, it makes it easier. When you have none of those things in place, it makes it that much harder. So, yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Bless his heart.
He's the sweetest.
I picked up on that too, is how important it is for the kids to have exposure to vocabulary and have a rich vocabulary all around them from birth, basically, to have that exposure so that they can connect with those words. That was really impactful to me.
Yes, it is very important. And we want, there's a lot of excellent work. Sonia Cobble and her colleagues do work with preschool and kindergarten around language building and helping teachers understand how important it is for them to use high-level language with students and longer sentences and work to elicit language from children. It's not just what they're hearing and exposed to, but it's what they retrieve and generate. She's written a book called Strive for Five, which is showing teachers how to encourage 5 exchanges in conversation, not just saying things to students, but asking them a question that requires a response and then responding to that in a way that engages them back and forth so that we're building their expressive language, which reinforces their receptive language. It's those two sides of the coin that we need to keep developing.
It's incredible, all the research that's been going on behind the scenes that, I wasn't aware of all of this research that's been going on and how important it is.
It's impossible to keep up with all it.
And I'm so thankful for people that are doing the research like you and your colleagues, because it's really going to open the door for these kids to have even better instruction from generation to generation and hopefully eliminate some of the frustrations that kids feel when they don't have those resources available to them. I did have another question for you. So if a teacher wanted to use a current curriculum and develop a fluency assessment used on prior learning, what suggestions could you offer?
To assess fluency using their curriculum, is that?
Yes. So if a teacher wanted to use a current curriculum that they already have, but they wanted to develop a fluency assessment based on the prior learning that the kids have already been exposed to, what would you suggest? The
general procedures of assessing what we call the assessment called oral reading fluency, which is that assessment of giving kids text. And generally, the assessment is done on text that is unfamiliar or unpracticed. I mean, it's not generally, it is. The assessment requires unfamiliar or unpracticed text read aloud for 1 minute and then scored in a particular way that each word has to be pronounced correctly. Omitted words are errors. Mispronounced words are errors. Words that are repeated are not errors. Words that are self-corrected are not errors. So there's a standard protocol for scoring that. And that assessment these days, that we call that oral reading fluency as an assessment. That is one of a whole suite or set of assessments that are called curriculum-based measures. And when oral reading fluency and all the other curriculum-based measures were first invented about 45 years ago, they didn't exist before that. They were invented. The original intent was to use, the reason they're called curriculum-based measures is that the researchers who invented these tools assumed teachers would use their curriculum, that they would, if they want to say, how fluent is my fourth grader, they would open a fourth grade text, social studies text, or their ELA materials or whatever it is, and have them read for a minute, and then compare that score to the other students to see how fluent they were. So it was a very school-based idea. Mm-hmm. You would compare students to the other students in that grade at your school, and you would use your own curriculum materials. That was the original intent. And it has grown completely from there, in that, for one thing, and that was actually a contribution that I made to curriculum-based measurement, is when I first heard that idea that we should compare our students to the other kids in their grade level at their own school didn't make any sense to me at all, because my entire career had been working in high poverty, low performing schools. I did not want to know if my students were as good as their peers. That's not what I want to know. So I did with my colleague Jerry Tindal. We have now done a set of 3 different studies using curriculum-based measure to establish some norms, performance norms, where we can set benchmarks from those performance norms. Say, this is what we should expect of a fourth grader anywhere reading any English text. Another change that's happened to CBM is that commercial publishers have figured out that they could sell you products where they make the passages, and they often now and they create their own norms and their own benchmarks for those. So things like Acadience and Dibble's 8th edition and Easy CBM and Ames Web and all those are just commercial versions of that original free for anybody idea of curriculum-based measurement. So they now have also all these bells and whistles. What is it? Acadience has the M-class interface that you do it all on computers and all this fancy stuff, but you don't need any of that. I mean, that can be helpful, and there are some wonderful things built into each of those assessments. But the original idea still is true. You can open a piece of text and have the student read it. Now, since we're here talking about children with dyslexia and children who are struggling, if I've got a 5th grader and I already know they can't read 5th grade text, opening the 5th grade text and having them read for a minute is not going to tell me a whole lot. The real purpose of those assessments were to identify kids at risk and then to monitor their progress once intervention has started. So that 5th grader, I already know they're at risk. So I'm not going to have them read a 5th grade text. Mm-hmm. I might, though, have them read a 3rd grade passage, if that's where they're reading. And then I can compare their oral reading fluency performance, words correct per minute, to 3rd graders. Mm. So this 5th grader, we've done a really good job. We've worked really hard to help this 5th grader read well at the 3rd grade level. They can read 3rd grade text, but do they read it fluently? I can check that by having them read a 3rd grade passage and then compare them to 3rd grade expectations. And if they're on track, great. Let's just keep them moving now to they can read fourth grade text fluently, and they can read ultimately fifth grade text fluently. So we can use those assessments, and then we can always, and we should be, using those assessments for progress monitoring. They are powerful, powerful indicators of whether our instruction is actually working or not.
We used your oral reading fluency norms chart all the time in the district where I worked right before I came out and did my own private practice. So I'm familiar with using the chart. Now I'm drawing a blank as to what measure we used to use the chart. Did we have our own, text that we used? I can't remember. But as far as with you, do you guys have a set of texts that you provide with your chart so that people can use this as a whole functioning package to do an assessment?
Yeah, we've always said there's multiple uses of that chart. The original purpose, though, was we did our first study before there was ever a Dibbles or an Ames Web or anything else. It was just teachers are told, go find a grade level text and have students read that. The purpose of our norms was to give them some way of interpreting those scores.
So any text.
There was Dibbles and that. And so we used all those scores. We took some Dibbles scores, we took Ames Web scores, we took easy CBM scores, and we compiled them all together. So they were still generic norms so that they could be used. If you're using Dibbles, great. You should use the Dibbles norms. If you're using Ames Web, you should use the Ames Web norms for benchmark decisions. But I want to know how they're reading in their social studies text or something else. That's when you would continue to use Hasbrouck and Tindal norms with any text. You can use it outside of grade level. So you don't look at the kid's grade level. You look at the grade level of the text of the passage and then say, how do they compare to third graders or eighth graders or whatever?
Okay.
That makes so much sense now. I mean, because I've had supervisors who maybe didn't understand the point of the chart, and they're like, okay, use this chart with your students. I'm like, well, we're not reading on grade level, so I don't know what I would be assessing exactly, because it's at the 10th. You have the fall, winter, spring. Right. And then they gain and then where they rank according to the 10th percentile, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentile. And what I really appreciated in the chart is that I worked solely for 27 out of my 30 years in public ed with dyslexic students. I did not know what a traditional reader looked like until I would pull those out, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I know we have work to go with this student, but it's really flying in my face how much more work we have to do with this student. Yeah.
That's a good point. And I remember that too. I actually very viscerally remember it working at an elementary school a few years into my career. And as a reading specialist on the first couple of weeks, I didn't have students yet generally. So I had some spare time. And I do remember letting a third grade teacher know that I had some time, and if she wanted me to, listen to some of her students read and do some assessments. This was way before we had oral reading fluency, but some of the teachers had kids do reading tests. And I remember going into her third grade classroom and just kid after kid, like, oh my word, this is a gifted reader. Wow. And then the next one, oh my gosh, here's another one. And pretty soon they, no, this is how third graders really read.
Is just how it is. Yeah. I totally get that. So in your studies, when you're working with dyslexic students, and I know it's on a continuum, mild, moderate, severe, but what's a good improvement aim for our dyslexic students if we're looking to improve their fluency? I mean, I understand 25th to 75th percentile is that whole normal, that's not the word I want, but average area for...
within the normal performance area. distribution.
What would be a realistic? I mean, I know what I would like it to be, but what would be a realistic gain, do you think?
Those are individually determined.
Sure.
They really are, because of all the factors like the intensity of the instruction that they're receiving. Where are they on the continuum of severe to mild dyslexia? There's no one size fits all
Sure.
that we can pull out of our hat. Lynn Fuchs and colleagues back in the 90s did a study that I often cite, where they came up with some expected gains in terms of how many words per week should we expect generally to students to grow across different grade levels, because students gain quite a bit of growth in the early grades, and then it slows down even for your typical students. They're not all still gaining, 3 words a week or whatever. But in that chart, it has a column for typical growth and then ambitious growth. And I often have looked at that chart and, again, not look at the grade of my student, but the grade that they're reading. So if the recommendation is an ambitious goal for a 3rd grader, and I've got an 8th grader reading at the 3rd grade level, I might use those ambitious goals of 2 words a week or 1.5 words a week. But then when I use that chart, when I'm training teachers, I say, but then you have to look at that child. Are they an English learner? Do they have severe dyslexia? Are they coming to school? Their attendance issues. You have to tweak those goals based on that. And it does depend on the age of the student. So it's a complex. It's not one size fits all, and there's not a formula we can use. But there are some guidelines from research about what we can expect at each grade level for typical growth and what we might hope to expect for ambitious growth. So we don't have to make those numbers up. They do exist.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And what is a good point to aim for when using the oral reading fluency chart with students?
In general, I mean, what we know from some good research, in fact, there was a wonderful study done in 2021, I believe, White et al., that looked at oral reading fluency performance and compared it to how well 4th grade students did on the NAEP assessment. Yeah, it's 2021. I'm pretty sure White et al. 2021. It's an open access paper. But what they found is that, and the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, is essentially a heavy-duty comprehension assessment. It's a really rigorous comprehension assessment in essence, and been used over decades and widely used by researchers because it's a really good, rigorous measure of comprehension. So in that study, they looked at the 4th grade performance, and it's always end of year performance. Mm-hmm. And what the NAEP does is categorize kids in their comprehension performance as advanced, the super duper comprehenders, proficient, basic, and below basic. Mm. And then what they did was they correlated the students' oral reading fluency to their comprehension performance. And it matched perfectly that those advanced readers, on average, were reading at the Hasbrouck and Tindal 75th percentile. Mm-hmm. The proficient readers were reading right around the 50th percentile. And the students who were below basic were significantly below the 50th percentile. So what they were showing is that the students who could read and understand adequately 4th grade text read at least at the 50th percentile. That also showed that even those advanced readers didn't read above the 75th percentile. So getting faster and faster and faster has no benefit.
Interesting.
For comprehension.
Okay.
So the sweet spot is the 50th to the 75th percentile.
Interesting.
Great. That's wonderful to hear.
Gosh.
Oh, so in our chart, there are kids, as you say, there's kids at the 90th percentile, but we didn't check their comprehension. We just simply looked at their words correct per minute and wrote it down. So those fast readers may well not be particularly good comprehenders because they're reading too fast.
They could be your cattle auctioneer, Amy. They could be your little boy.
Oh my gosh, you're making me want to go do research, and I'm not a numbers person.
I'm not either, so I always collaborate with others. I love my statisticians who tell me what these numbers mean, but yeah, it takes a team to do research.
That's amazing. That's just so many eye-opening things you've said today.
Gosh, I love it.
We're getting close to wrapping it up. So one of the things we like to do, and this stems from somebody when we did our first few episodes, they're like, we really like it when you talk about websites and books that they like. And I'm like, well, that's just a good thing to recycle every time. So Dr. Hasbrouck, what are some books that you would recommend in addition or to your own? Any articles or websites?
Well, since I just mentioned that White et al. Study from 2021, and I should have the title of it off the top of my head, but if you look at NAEP and oral reading fluency scores, you'll find it because it is out there. And anybody who's interested, this is not just dyslexia, but wanting to know not only what, but why we don't just teach our students to read faster and faster and faster. That's a great one. I would say, and again, I'm not going to come up with the name of the actual title of the article, but for all dyslexia practitioners, they should read Liz Stevens' recent, I think it's 2023, meta-analysis on multisensory instruction and what she very reasonably concludes that how we should be thinking about our instruction. What is the instruction that really works? A couple of books. A book that I go to over and over and over and over again, especially the chapter on word reading disabilities, is Jack Fletcher's book, Fletcher, Fuchs, Lyon. It's multiple authors on that book. It's just unbelievably rich and deep. I read it and then I reread it, but it's quite up to date. It's the second edition of his book on learning disabilities, and that the chapter on word reading disabilities particularly is relevant to dyslexia and is so accurately, I think, reflects the research. So I would want to recommend the new book that I co-edited with Nancy Young. It's being very, very well received all over the world, called Climbing the Ladder of Reading and Writing. It is an edited book. Nancy and I asked many amazing researchers who specialize in various aspects of learning to read to write chapters on specific comprehension disabilities, older students who struggle with reading. There's a chapter on children who are deaf and hard of hearing. There's a chapter on multilingual. There's a chapter on dialect. There's a chapter, I wrote the chapter on dyslexia. But the whole book is framed around Nancy's brilliant, I think, infographic called The Ladder of Reading and Writing. And so the first few chapters explain what the ladder is. And essentially, it is a visual representation of the fact that learning to read and write is like climbing a ladder, and that process of climbing the ladder is going to vary in difficulty for different students. There's children who are going to zoom up that ladder with little or no instruction. Most students are going to climb the ladder just at an expected level with good instruction. And then we have children with dyslexia and other learning challenges that make it difficult. Then the whole rest of the book, there's another chapter then of, because of this, what is it that we need to know about reading and reading instruction and how to differentiate it, because you're going to have all these kids in your classroom. And then the rest of the book is chapters on the various things that make learning to read and write difficult. Attention deficit disorder, hearing impairments, those kinds of things. So it's really easy to read book. We made sure that each chapter, the chapters are rather short. It's not a book like Jack Fletcher's book. It's an easy to read book, very much written for parents, practitioners who want a sense of what ADHD is, for example, and great resources. So it's an overview, very up to date. We published it just this year, 2024. So it's very current, up to date. Lots of good resources and supports for parents and teachers as well.
That sounds amazing.
It does sound amazing.
I cannot wait.
I'm thinking it's going to start to be assigned to my trainees when I start a new practitioner and therapist cohort. So that sounds like a good book to make part of my syllabus from here on out.
Yeah, we have seen a lot of professors are using it, especially with undergraduates and new trainees, although I think at a master's level it could have utility too, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I have one last question for you.
Melissa.
So I think it would be hard to find people who are like you, who are so gifted and well-versed in all things dyslexia, learning disabilities. I just wonder, though, is there anybody that you think of who it really inspires you? Was there somebody who inspired you to take this path? Is there anybody who inspires you now? Is there anybody particularly that you would like to mention?
Yes, and I've actually been thinking about this quite a bit, Melissa, that I don't know if you know, but it has now been formally announced that the International Dyslexia Association will be awarding me the Samuel Orton Award.
Very well deserved.
Which I'm just so deeply, deeply honored. And the reason I'm thinking a lot about my inspirations is because when you receive the Samuel Orton Award, one of the things that you're asked to do is deliver the annual Orton Memorial Lecture to the entire IDA conference. Last year's winner was your friend, Nancy Mather.
Oh.
She did a wonderful job in her Orton Memorial Lecture. So I've been preparing what I'm going to say in front of all those thousands of dyslexia specialists and parents and others. And I'm going to talk about teachers. I'm going to highlight the role of teachers in my life and all of our lives. So I have been thinking about my inspirations along the way. I was just blessed, totally lucked out to happen to be at the University of Oregon when I wanted to learn to be a teacher and get certified as a teacher, and ended up early on studying with Zig Engelman, who is the recognized father of direct instruction. He invented this idea of what he used to say was model, lead, and test. Demonstrate, guided practice, independent practice. He taught us how to do that. I started studying with him when I was 19 years old.
Wow.
So that's the way I learned to teach. You model, you do guided practice, you do independent practice. That's how I learned how to teach. So I've done that for my entire career and just watch over the years as people discover that, including another inspiration of every book teacher I know is Anita Archer.
Yes, she's amazing.
Who is also at the University of Oregon. She wasn't there. We didn't overlap, but she came to the University of Oregon and worked with Zig and others in direct instruction, and then put her fabulous Anita Archer head into this. And wrote the book on explicit instruction and gave us and continues to give us all good guidelines about how to do that explicit instruction that we know works with students and all learners when we're learning a new skill. So I continue to be inspired by Anita, who's become a friend of mine. We used to live fairly close to each other. She lives in Portland and I live near, and we would get together. But friend or not friend, when I'm at a conference and she's speaking, I try to get in the front row if I possibly can and just absorb all that good stuff. And there's just so much good research going on right now. I am a big fan of Nadine Gabb's research. She's now at Harvard University. She is working to explore the brain development of children with dyslexia. And she's, some of her work right now is involving infants and toddlers. So we can figure out as absolutely early as possible what's going on in these brains, and then very importantly, what should we do about it? So that's one of a number of people and Jack Fletcher. I mean, he's just my guru in this field. As we talked about when we first started, it's so complex. You're going to get very wise people who draw different conclusions. And that leaves us as practitioners, who do we believe? So I think in order to cope with all this, we have to find one, at least one person that we say, I'm going to follow them.
Yeah.
If they say that this is what we should do, and Jack Fletcher is that for me. If he says this is the way we should think about it, then okay, I'm until I'm convinced otherwise, that's what I'm going to do. So
I remember hearing him speak live back in 2004, and I think he was still out of the University of Houston, and I just held on to every word that he said. And then later, like a few years later, because I would follow his stuff, I remember going to an interview. They go, well, who inspires you in the field of education that you like reading about? I go, oh, Dr. Jack Fletcher. And the person who was interviewing me, she goes, oh, Amy, he's really controversial. I was like, oh. Okay.
Yes, he's a brave person. But the reason I continue to hold him in high regard is because he's not just making this stuff up. No. He'll make controversial statements, but it's based on his interpretation of the best evidence. He can always say where his evidence is coming from. And then he just says, this is my interpretation. And I just happen to agree with him. And yes, he does make controversial.
Yeah. Like it though.
Yeah. Very focused on kid outcome. And that's a touchstone for me. If people just do research up here and it has nothing to do with actual kids, Jack is always very cognizant of what this means for an adolescent reader or a second grade beginning reader. So he's always thinking about real kids, and that's important to me.
Absolutely.
I agree. I am so excited because you will be at IDA and we will be too. So we'll get to officially meet you. Hopefully you can stop by our booth and say hello. We'll be doing a live podcast. So we'd love to just have you say hello to us and greet us there.
And you can bring Dr. Mather. I was almost going to say Nancy, but we're not that close. So Dr. Mather.
Nancy and I can come by.
Yes, I would love that. We would love that.
Well, we appreciate your time so much for devoting so much time for our little podcast. And we're just, it's getting out there, word about it's getting out. And I'm expecting to see your book spike. So that's the hope.
We are so grateful for your time and your expertise and everything that you've done in the field of education to help all of us who are sitting here today and out there in the listening audience learn what they need to learn to help students. So we appreciate you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you too. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much. So this is Amy.
And Melissa.
And we're the Dyslexia Duo. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. The Dyslexia Duo hosts are Melissa Dean
and Amy Rodenroth. The producer is Greg Rodenroth.
Dyslexia awareness is so important. Please share with your friends, family, and anyone who needs to know more about dyslexia.
Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X at the Dyslexia Duo.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.